The unblinking reef. They say the Great Barrier Reef doesn't just take your breath, it steals your senses. Alon told Brianna to trust her eyes. But down here, beneath the waves where darkness swallows light and sound becomes something you feel in your chest rather than hear, your eyes betray you first. Brianna floated weightlessly in the dark water, suspended in that peculiar state between falling and flying. She reached toward a pulsing orange glow in the distance, her fingers stretching through the liquid space. The light moved like a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, hypnotic. Behind her, Alon's hand reached for hers but stopped just short, his fingers hovering inches away, hesitating in a way that wasn't like him at all. In this moment, as particles of sediment drifted between them like snow, Brianna stared at something wearing Alon's face. Its eyes didn't blink. The fire between them wasn't warming her. And the man she was looking at wasn't Alon. 20 minutes earlier, everything had been perfect. Brianna and Alon glided through the vibrant coral gardens like birds through an alien forest. Their dive lights cut through the inky blackness, revealing explosions of color that seemed impossible. Electric purples, neon yellows, blues so deep they hurt to look at. Fish scattered in their wake, scales flashing like scattered coins. They'd been diving together for 5 years, and their underwater communication was effortless. Hand signals that had become a language all their own, shared glances that held entire conversations, an easy intimacy that came from knowing someone completely. Down here, where speech was impossible, they'd learned to read each other's smallest movements. Alon playfully nudged a sleeping parrotfish with his light, and the creature startled awake in an indignant cloud of mucous membrane. Brianna laughed silently into her regulator, bubbles streaming upward in a silver chain toward the distant surface. Her laughter had always been silent down here, but he knew it anyway. Saw it in the crinkle around her eyes visible through her mask. They discovered a section of brain coral glowing an otherworldly blue-green, its ridges and valleys pulsing with bioluminescent bacteria. The coral seemed to breathe beneath their lights, expanding and contracting with an ancient rhythm. Then Brianna saw it, the orange light that had drawn her from the start, burning in the darkness like a campfire glimpsed through trees. She pointed excitedly, her whole body animated with discovery. Alon nodded and pulled out his waterproof camera, already adjusting settings with the ease of long practice. As they approached, swimming with careful, measured fin strokes to avoid disturbing the delicate ecosystem, they could see it clearly. A cluster of thick tentacles pulsing orange-red, perfectly mimicking burning embers. The likeness was uncanny. You could almost believe you were looking at coals in a dying fire. Shimmering particles drifted away like sparks carried on an invisible wind, each one glowing briefly before winking out into the darkness. Brianna reached out her gloved finger, drawn by scientific curiosity and something deeper. The same impulse that makes children reach for flames. She touched the fire gently. Her face registered surprise behind her mask. The light looked warm, inviting, alive with heat. But her finger met only cold gelatin, the texture of something that had never known warmth at all. She pulled out her underwater slate, the pencil attached by a coiled cord, and wrote in careful letters, "Cold." Alon leaned in to read, then wrote back, "Mimic, incredible." He began photographing it enthusiastically, his camera flash strobing through the water. He was fascinated by evolutionary cleverness, by the brilliant adaptations that allowed creatures to survive in this unforgiving environment. Both of them believed it was harmless. Just another example of the reef's genius for deception. A creature that had learned to look dangerous, to wear the costume of fire, without actually possessing any weapon at all. They should have known better. On the reef, mimicry is never just for show. Then the water changed. The shift was subtle at first. A slight increase in current, a change in pressure against their skin. Then the surge hit without warning. The water churned violently, transforming from liquid into something with mass and anger. Sand and debris exploded up from the seafloor, clouding everything. The visibility that had been 20 feet dropped to 2 in seconds. Distant thunder rumbled through the water, a sound that felt more than heard. A deep vibration in the chest, in the bones, a reminder that they were in an element that didn't belong to them. Alon's hand signals were urgent, almost violent in their intensity. Stay close. Don't let go. But nature doesn't negotiate. A powerful surge slammed Brianna against a coral head. She felt the impact through her wetsuit, felt the coral's calcium skeleton crack beneath her weight. Then the current reversed, sucking her backward and down into a narrow canyon between towering coral formations that rose like buildings on either side. She spun helplessly, a leaf in a storm. Her regulator was nearly torn from her mouth. She bit down hard on the mouthpiece, fighting panic. Bubbles burst frantically from around the seal as she tried to call out, tried to scream Alon's name into water that swallowed sound. The rushing water distorted everything. Up became down. Left became right. Her dive computer beeped urgently, but she couldn't focus on the numbers. Disoriented and battered, her body aching from impacts she couldn't even remember, she saw a narrow opening ahead, calmer water beyond, tinged with moonlight. She pushed toward it with everything she had, her legs burning from the effort of fighting the current. The canyon walls pressed close on either side, scraping against her tank. Coral polyps caught on her wetsuit. She had to turn sideways to fit, exhaling to make herself smaller. As Brianna squeezed through the tight coral arch, her tank scraping against stone formed over centuries, a hand shot out from a crevice and clamped onto her wetsuit sleeve. A black dive glove. Alon's glove. She'd bought it for him last Christmas, had watched him open it with that smile he got when he was genuinely pleased. Relief flooded through her so powerfully it was almost painful. He'd found her. He'd fought through the surge to find her. That was so like him. Stubborn, protective, never willing to leave her behind. Then the relief curdled into confusion. The hand felt wrong. Too cold, even through the neoprene. Too strong. The grip like a vice, like something mechanical rather than human. As she looked closer, fighting to focus in the dim light, the glove had a brain coral texture, stretched unnaturally across the surface. The pattern was too regular, too perfect. And the fingers, they didn't bend quite right at the joints. The grip tightened, inexorable, and began dragging her backward into the darkness of the crevice where things without names lived in permanent night. Terror replaced confusion with the speed of a switching light. Pure instinct took over, the animal brain that lived beneath thought and reason. Brianna yanked her dive knife free from its sheath on her calf. The blade caught moonlight for a moment, then she slashed upward at the wrist, putting all her fear and strength into the strike. No blood came out. Instead, thick black ink exploded into the water like an underwater bomb, shot through with glowing purple particles that swirled and danced. The ink was dense, oily, alive with bioluminescence. The grip released suddenly. Brianna kicked away hard, her fins churning the ink into eddies and spirals. She disappeared into the dark cloud, holding her breath despite the regulator, some primitive part of her not wanting to breathe in whatever that thing had expelled. Behind her, something massive made a guttural thwump sound as it recoiled. A sound too deep to be heard, felt instead as a pressure wave that traveled through her chest. Alone in the murky water, Brianna's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. Remnants of the ink swirled around her like smoke, glowing particles slowly fading like dying stars. She swam frantically through the coral labyrinth, her light sweeping desperately across surfaces that all looked the same. Brain coral, staghorn, table coral, all rendered alien and threatening in her panic. Then her beam caught something that made her freeze. Alon's yellow dive mask snagged on a piece of staghorn coral. the mask he'd had for 10 years, that he refused to replace despite the scratches on the lens. The mask he never took off until he was safely back on the boat. Her chest tightened. Her breathing accelerated, sucking air too quickly from her tank. She forced herself to slow down, to think. The mask could have been torn off in the surge. It didn't mean anything. It didn't mean the worst. She pushed forward into a large, shallow tide pool where moonlight filtered weakly from above, turning the water a pale, silvery green. The surface was 15 feet up. She could see the boundary between water and air, could see the moon's distorted face looking down. There was a figure sitting on a flat coral table with its back to her. Still? Too still. No one sat that still underwater. You were always moving, adjusting, compensating for current and breath. But it was Alon. She recognized the set of his shoulders, the particular blue of his wetsuit, the way he held his head. Relief washed over her so powerfully that tears blurred her vision behind her mask. They mixed with the salt water already there, warm against her cold cheeks. She kicked toward him, her body trembling with emotion, her hands already reaching for him. She crossed the distance in seconds that felt like hours, reached him, touched his shoulder. That familiar gesture they'd shared 1,000 times. Morning coffee, late nights, moments of comfort and connection. Her hand knew the shape of him. She turned him gently. The face that looked back at her was Alon's face. Every detail was correct. The slight crook in his nose from a childhood break, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the exact shape of his lips. But it was wrong. Wrong in a way that made her hindbrain scream. Wrong in a way that bypassed thought and struck directly at instinct. Too perfect, like wax that had been left in the sun just long enough to soften. The features were all there but somehow flattened, like a high-resolution photograph printed on flesh. The eyes were unblinking dark spots, wet and reflective, but empty of anything that could be called sight. No breath came from the regulator. The chest didn't move. The skin was smooth and seamless, without pores or blemishes, with the texture of cold, wet suede. And beneath the surface, she could see it now, her brain finally processing what her eyes had been trying to tell her. 3 thick tentacles were clearly visible, woven together to form the head, like cables wrapped around each other. The face was merely a pattern of chromatophores, color cells contracting and expanding to create an illusion. There was no mouth, just a seam where one should be. The thing wearing Alon's face stared at her with those unblinking black eyes. It didn't breathe. It didn't blink. It just watched with an intelligence that was utterly alien. The only sound was Brianna's frantic breathing into her regulator, harsh and rapid. Then another sound began, a low, unsettling hum that emanated from the creature. It resonated in her chest, made her teeth ache, set up a vibration in her inner ear that threatened to trigger vertigo. The mimic's arms, perfectly replicating Alon's down to the hair on the forearms visible through the wetsuit, slowly wrapped around her. The movement was deliberate, unhurried. It had all the time in the world. The embrace was strong, unyielding. This wasn't the embrace of love. It was the coil of a python, the patient squeeze of a predator that killed through suffocation. It began pulling her toward the deeper water at the edge of the tide pool, where the bottom dropped away into darkness. Her knife was gone, lost somewhere in the surge and the chaos. Her hands scrabbled uselessly against the creature's arms, finding no purchase on the smooth, cold surface. Brianna struggled against the grip, her mind racing past panic into that crystal clarity that sometimes comes in moments of mortal danger. Think, what do I have? What can I use? Her hands were empty. Her knife was gone. Her dive light wouldn't help. The creature thrived in light and darkness equally. She was being pulled deeper, her computer beeping urgently about depth and nitrogen saturation. Then her hand fumbled desperately at her BCD pocket, fingers numb and clumsy, and found the familiar shape of her 6-ounce bottle of hand sanitizer. She'd put it there that morning, a habit from years of dive travel. High alcohol gel. Kept everything clean in the tropics. High alcohol. She tore it free with shaking fingers and popped the cap open with her thumb. Then she jammed the nozzle directly between the mimic's eyes, right where the tentacles wove together, where the illusion was most concentrated, and squeezed with all her strength. The reaction was immediate and violent. The Alon face rippled and buckled like wet paper dissolving in rain. The carefully crafted patterns on its skin began to melt away, chromatophores misfiring in chaotic waves of color. The bioluminescence beneath flared erratically, a panicked, strobing violet light that lit up the entire tide pool in brief, seizure-inducing flashes. The alcohol was disrupting the creature's chemical signaling, burning through the mucous membrane that protected its color cells, short-circuiting the sophisticated neural network that controlled the disguise. The creature recoiled with a silent, undulating spasm, every tentacle contracting at once. The arms released her. She was dropped unceremoniously onto the coral floor. The Alon shape collapsed entirely like a puppet with cut strings, revealing the true form beneath. A large, multi-limbed cephalopod easily 6 feet across, its skin swirling in disrupted camouflage patterns that flickered between purple and red and sickly yellow. 8 arms and 2 longer feeding tentacles writhed in confusion. It jetted away with a powerful squirt of water from its siphon, leaving a trail of ink and disturbed sediment. It disappeared into a dark fissure in the coral, retreating to depths where humans couldn't follow. Brianna was left gasping on the floor of the tide pool, trembling uncontrollably, her hands covered in sanitizer and strange slime that glowed faintly purple in her dive light. Her whole body shook with adrenaline crash. The water slowly began to clear, ink and sediment settling. Then a powerful dive light swept across the scene, cutting through the murk. "Brianna!" The voice was muffled by water and regulator, but she knew it. She knew it in her bones. The real Alon splashed into the tide pool, completely out of breath, his face twisted with terror behind his mask. He was disheveled, his hair plastered to his forehead in dark streaks, his wetsuit torn at the shoulder. His body radiated warmth from exertion. She could see the heat shimmer in the water around him. When he saw her shaking on the coral floor, holding an empty bottle in nerveless fingers, he kicked over to her with powerful strokes. "Oh my God, you're safe." He reached for her, his hands extended. Brianna paused for just a split second. Her eyes flicked to his face, then his hands, studying them with an intensity born of trauma. This time she saw genuine concern in his moving eyes that blinked, that tracked her face, that held real emotion. A bead of sweat on his temple mixing with seawater. His chest heaving with real breath, his shoulders rising and falling, the warmth radiating from him like a beacon. She saw the small imperfections that made him human, the asymmetry of his face, the way one eyebrow sat slightly higher than the other, the faint acne scar on his chin. She dropped the empty bottle and watched it drift down to the sand. Then she lunged into his arms, burying her face against his chest. His arms wrapped around her immediately, strong, familiar, and warm. So impossibly warm after the cold embrace of the thing that had worn his shape. "You're warm," she sobbed into his wetsuit, her voice muffled and broken. "Alon, you're so warm." "I've got you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his own hands shaking as they held her. "We're getting out of here, together, I promise, together." They stayed like that for a long moment, 2 humans clinging to each other in the vast alien ocean. The reef is full of beautiful lies and cold promises. Evolution has crafted 1,000 perfect deceptions, painted them in colors that entrance and mesmerize. But some warmth, once found, is a truth you never let go of. not even in the darkest depths where things without names wear the faces of the ones you love. They embraced in the beam of his dive light, a small beacon of human warmth in the vast, deceptive ocean. Then, still holding each other, moving as one, they began swimming slowly toward the surface, toward air and light and safety. The gentle underwater murmurs returned, the distant sound of waves, the clicks and chirps of nocturnal reef creatures, but this time with a sense of hopeful peace. Above them, through 15 feet of water, the moon watched their ascent. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking and subscribing.